Right then, welcome back to the channel. Now, I'm sure, like you guys, I've been head down, focusing on what's going on with the new stadium announcement, trying to get to the bottom of what's happening. There's been some really good articles written, some good questions raised by different journalists. I've seen financial experts talking about the various different things, and I've got my head into the actual feasibility study that they published as well to try and wrap my head around what United's plan is and how this is all going to work. Now, that being said, there's still quite a lot of questions that I think need answering. So I want to put forward those questions and see if we can get to the bottom of some of those. Hopefully over the next few months, before this all properly kicks off, we'll start to get the answers for those sort of things. But I think there's some real red flags that absolutely need answering. Now, the first one, and I think it might be the biggest, you know, but I also think that the very last question is one that I think all of us really, really want the answer to. Now, I'll start it with what I think could be one of the biggest. Now, we are $1 billion in debt. Since last season, we lost 113 million. The debt repayments are £37 million a year, and since 2005, over 1.06 billion has gone on interest alone. Money that could have been spent on transfers, on wages, on, I don't know, a new fucking stadium. Now, we're supposed to believe that somehow this club can finance a £2 billion stadium without a clear plan. Now, Omar Barada was speaking about both Spurs and Arsenal and their ability to compete dropping because of the stadium investment. And he admitted that Spurs and Arsenal had to tighten their spending on transfers because of the new stadium. If United take on a loan to fund this means higher debt, higher repayments, less money for the squad. How do we compete if we have to do that? We're already seeing PSR constraints and losses stacking up back to back to back. We've already seen what happens when debt becomes a burden. Look at Arsenal. They had to sell their best players and try and rely on smaller signings and a lot of their youth because of building the Emirates. Spurs spent years as a selling club because of their new stadium. The PSR constraints that United already find ourselves under with the mismanagement on the back of that, we're expected to now fund a stadium and a squad rebuild at the same time. To me, it doesn't add up. How are we going to do this? If we take on more debt, we become more financially crippled. If investors come in, they take the equity and they take the profits that that new stadium is meant to generate. What does it mean for club ownership? Does it mean that someone else is coming in? Does it mean that there's going to be a bigger chunk goes to INEOS? And does the squad suffer in the meantime? I think that's a really important question. Number two, ticket prices. Will the ticket prices skyrocket? And who actually gets to sit in this stadium? Some really interesting quotes come out from the 1958 group looking at what's happening with the tickets and what could happen with the tickets. And I also thought that there was something buried in the fine print of the club's economic study as well. 15,500 seats in this new stadium are going to be corporate hospitality. That means over 15% of the entire capacity are going to be corporate Daves. That's insane. Now, we know why. Corporate seats mean a higher revenue per ticket, more executive boxes, more prawn sandwiches. But what about actual fans? And where do the kids go? United are losing out to City, partially on price, partially on availability when it comes to trying to get a ticket at Old Trafford, and partially on the ability to go with your mates as well, if we're being honest with ourselves. Where are we getting those young fans in? We should be prioritising and ring fencing and making sure you can get under 21s, under 18s, under 16s into that stadium and get them into the culture of watching Manchester United. Is this going to be a place that normal people can even afford to go? And not only that, there's 100,000 tickets. It's all right having a 100,000 seater stadium. It looks fantastic for Champions League nights, should we find ourselves there, or maybe host a Champions League final, I don't know. It looked fantastic for the Manchester derby, or when Liverpool come to town. Yeah, it'll be absolutely rammed out. But what about Port Vale in the third round of the League Cup on a Tuesday night? You've got to find 100,000 people that can come into that stadium then. That's when it starts getting a little bit different. And if the football's turgid on the pitch, those tickets will be hard to sell. There's no guarantee, especially when you've not had the ability for young people to get into the habit of going to the match. You can't just rely on an old name for Manchester United to fill that thing. You actually have to deliver on the pitch. Tottenham Stadium as well was meant to be future of football, right? Their cheapest season ticket is £1,000. Do you really think that United aren't going to follow the same suit with that? £1,000 for the average man on the street at the moment when everything is going up, it's just not feasible. Like I said, 100,000 seater stadium sounds fantastic. If it's only accessible to tourists and corporate clients, You think there's going to be any sort of atmosphere in there? And how do you have that fortress that, Ratcliffe talked about? Question 3, will the atmosphere survive this? Or is it going to be another soulless bowl? History tells us new stadiums do not always work. Juventus moved from the Del Alpi to that new modern stadium and their average attendances dropped. Bayern Munich's Allianz Arena is fantastic from the outside, but it's a little bit sterile. West Ham's move to London Stadium, disastrous. The West Ham fans hate it. United are claiming that this 23,000-seater Stretford End will be the heartbeat of the stadium. Like we've not heard that before. West Ham fans thought it was going to get a brilliant atmosphere as well, and now they call their new home Soulless FC. The best stadiums in the world aren't always the biggest. They're the ones that create the best atmospheres, the best way for fans to watch the game. If we're going to build a real football stadium, it needs to be a real football stadium and not just some corporate event space disguised as one. Question 4. What happens to Old Trafford? What's the actual plan? Like the current stadium. United have said that the new stadium will be built next to Old Trafford, meaning that matches can still be played there until the new ground is finished. Once it's ready, it's going to take 12 months to demolish Old Trafford. Okay? Here's the problem. Where does it actually fit? Because I've looked at those images, and this new stadium's fucking massive, right? That umbrella canopy alone, I can only assume that umbrella canopy has to come on afterwards, after everything's finished and after current Old Trafford has been knocked down. Looking at it, I don't see how they can both physically exist side by side. And if they do physically exist side by side, you're going to take out a lot of the space around Old Trafford and where people get in and out of that stadium. Is that going to be... I'm sure they've done these studies, but looking at it, it don't look like it's possible. And what happens if things don't go to plan? Because things frequently do not go to plan. Tottenham Stadium's took 2 extra years on top of their plan to finish. Everton's is 300 million over budget. If there's delays, if there's issues with the budget, what happens if you get stuck with Old Trafford with half a finished stadium on the outside, blocking entries and all that sort of stuff? How does the new stadium operate with an old stadium being demolished for a year outside it work? And question 5, what happens to the Glazers and why do they still get to profit? Jim Ratcliffe has repeatedly said that the Glazers haven't invested in the infrastructure for 20 years, yet somehow, after 2 decades of asset stripping, they still get to be part of this project going forward. INEOS only owns 27% of the club, but by owning 27% of the club, they're the ones leading this stadium project. Glazers are still here, still taking dividends, still allegedly making decisions, although I don't even know if I don't know if they even know we've decided to build a new stadium. INEOS seemingly doing all of this hard work and those parasites still get to keep cashing in. How does that make sense? How are United raising the money for that? How are you raising the money for that with this weird complex ownership scheme when 1/4 of the management is doing all of the work? Are we going to take on more debt that benefits the Glazers and burdens the club? 20 years ago, they took on debt to buy the club and they still haven't fucking paid it off. Are investors going to take equity? A load of people in the comments was like, we're just going to get investors to help with the stadium. Okay, you get investors, they're going to take equity. The equity means the profit that the stadium was going to make now goes to those investors and not to the football club who wanted to build the new stadium to make more money. It makes no sense. More investors are going to mean less control for INEOS and Jim Ratcliffe as well, which, again, doesn't seemingly make a lot of sense. And again, did the Glazers just get a free ride while everybody else is running this football club, trying to make it the best football club in the world? They just get to sit there being like, sweet. If Radcliffe's really serious about making United great again, the stadium project can't be allowed to be another way to allow the Glazers to profit without any investment. It's fucking maddening and ridiculous. And I think the fans deserve a full transparency on how this is going to be funded and whether it pushes them out or it cements them here forever. Because it already feels like you're not getting rid of them. Look, a new stadium sounds incredible. And if everyone's sitting there going, this is just me being negative, it's not. It's a valid fucking question, right? I'm trying to ask valid questions. I don't just be told something and go, cool, that's fine. I didn't in 2005 when the Glazers were coming in. That's why I was on the protest marches. How do we pay for this? Who gets to sit in it? Will the atmosphere survive? And what happens to the Glazers? I don't just want a 100,000-seater stadium. I'm not going to be appeased by a new shiny thing. I want Manchester United to be what they were when I was growing up, which is feared, loved, hated, and adored. There's no point having the best stadium in the Championship. Not me. That's my questions. Any that you have, let me know in the comments below. Maybe we'll get the answers to some of these in the near future. Maybe some of these will take a little bit longer. Either way, let me know your thoughts. See you in the next one. Laters. Hey, thank you for watching the video. If you are new around these parts, then don't forget to subscribe. My channel is proudly supported by my community on Patreon. If you'd like to get a little bit of extra content, a Discord group, meetups, five-a-side games, weekly podcasts, behind the scenes, and even an occasional bit of transfer news as and when I get it, then for the price of a pint, you can show your appreciation for the content that we make and get some goodies for doing so as well. Check the link in the description or click the button right here. You'll also find all of my socials here too if you want to follow me on any of those platforms. Nice one.